3. Tunguska. I was naive in surmising I was the first part of myself to land on this planet. At the time, I had no information to suggest otherwise, but I also had none to support my contention that this planet had never known communion. Using the memories the General offered me, which were only a fraction of what his tumor vessel held, I reconstructed the events of the General's near-fatal landing on this planet, and presented this vision to my own tumor vessel, making sure to string the events together in a palatable sequence, artificial as it was, so that my tumor's structure could comprehend them. The vision began nearly a century ago, with an aerial view of an icy landscape in a northern region of a country called Russia, a region called Tunguska by the tumors that had named it long ago. I felt the impending moments of the General's crash, trapped in a failing cockpit I had never occupied. Warning alarms blared in the falling ship as the General frantically consulted his craft's analyses of the planet's environmental composition. I felt his cells shifting as his ship began to burn. The moment he had gathered enough data to instruct his cells on what base shapes to form, the General ejected. His craft exploded into rubble just before impacting the planet's surface, obliterating a swath of forest in the process, and creating a crater that was like that left by a small meteor. After drifting down on a parachute of makeshift flesh, the General found himself in a frozen maze of trees. Pursued by wolves, he morphed into one of them, as I would later do, so many miles south of there, and so many decades later. The General encountered no humans for several months. For a time, he assumed, as I had, that this world had never known communion. I saw how he marveled at the brutal limitations these life forms remained trapped in, how their mere existence seemed like the product of some dark, celestial comedy. For a time, the General remained in the forests of Siberia, exploring and cataloging the forms of fauna there, and leaving many pieces of himself embedded within their animal communities, with instructions to remain camouflaged in their animal skins until some greater part instructed them to do otherwise. Like me, the General eventually encountered humans who had made their way even into these inhospitable wastelands and chosen, for some incomprehensible reason, to attempt to live there. Small communities of people, with cultural habits that allowed them to adapt to the harsh conditions of the land, were easily infiltrated by the General, who chose to commune with them only while they slept. Spending time among multiple species of animals had taught the General that subtlety was a prerequisite for any successful form of communion on this world. It wasn't until the year 1919 that the General made his way out of the most remote areas of Russia and into what these tumors called a city, a gathering place constructed of abiotic materials, as if to provide some gross facsimile of the fundamental and divine organic network that connects all cells. The General, who was then being a fox, found his animal eyes stung by the electric lights of the city. He batted his fast-closed eyelids with snow-caked paws before searching his cells for another form that could better navigate the tall, blocky constructs of the city. He settled on a bird, a white stork, and took that form, gliding on its wings from the snow-laden trees into the cold light of the city of Okhotsk. After spending a few days in the city, nesting atop a derelict building, the general decided upon a human candidate for communion. The human was a Russian orphan, what the Russians at the time called a besprizorny. The general glided to the child while he slept in an alleyway, warmed by a makeshift covering of discarded newspapers. The horrors the general witnessed as he took over the tumor of the child were what caused my own body, the body of child's, to weep. The sheer grotesquerie of the form of existence endured by so flawed a clot of biomass, the unfathomable brutality and lunacy of nearly starving to death in an abiotic realm whose supposed purpose was to resist the unforgiving laws of nature, overwhelmed me. I struggled to continue constructing the narrative that would allow Childs's mind to commune with the general's memories. It wasn't just the limited morphology or cognitive capacity of these beings. It was the life-killing mentality that seemed to pervade all the meta-systems these tumors had attempted to construct, supposedly to somehow preserve or elevate themselves. Did they simply want to destroy themselves, lacking any chance for communion, but had no way of doing it directly? And so they instead devised external systems that accomplished this desire for self-annihilation in roundabout ways that evaded their conscious will? Childs's body wept, its eyes flitting in different directions. The general wiped Childs's face, my face, and stroked my forehead, initiating some kind of ancient simian comfort response. I felt Childs's body relax slightly, and continued my journey through the general's memories. The general left a part of himself in the child, but transferred quickly to a visiting political figure named Alexander Helfgott. Helfgott was 33 at the time, and had come to Okhotsk to visit a distant relative who was dying of cirrhosis, a disease that had killed a great many tumors in this part of the world. The general, being Helfgott, chose to continue his tumor's intended path of behavior, extrapolating based on that tumor's inherent structural proclivities. This was an experiment. The general had learned by now, as I had, that adaptation was provocation. Rather than adapt, the general simply acted. He placed himself exactly where Helfgott's tumor would have placed itself if the general had never became him. Helfgott's life played out as the other tumors recorded it had. In 1920, the general, being Helfgott, joined the Central Bureau of the Party of Socialist Revolutionaries. A year later, the general was arrested. He was thrown into a prison at a place called Arkhangelsk, a place as unforgiving as the alleyway where the orphan boy the general first communed with shivered away his nights. While imprisoned, the general made use of his tumor. He wrote a short essay criticizing the Cheka secret police that had imprisoned him, entitled Ship of Death. While the title of the essay referred to the crash landing of the general's ship, the general left its content up to the inclinations of his tumor. The essay found its way out of Russia and was published in the human city called Berlin 2 years later. Eventually, after several more terms of arrest, the general, being Helfgott, was executed in 1938, 1 year before what these tumors call the Second World War. After feigning death, when Helfgott's body lay alone and unguarded in a morgue, the colonel left it and went on to establish himself elsewhere.